Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of First Kings. Today we are in chapter 2. As we begin in the book of First Kings, it is a record of the tail end of the life of David. In chapter 2, it is towards the time when David was about to die. And so it reads this as, and this is the idea of and then means after chapter 1 was over, remembering chapter 1, David was old, frail, cold, needs a warmer, a young woman. He was not very active anymore, always lying in bed. And so, with the appointment and declaration of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 1 begins. And David's time to die drew near. It was approaching. This is approaching. Now, the idea of time to die, the word die really means to come to an end, right? To come to an end. It means life as he knows it will come to an end. And as we are going to read chapter 2, you find that these would be what we would call a dying man's last words. And then we find that, and then as it draws near, and then David commanded his son Solomon. And this is what he has to say. The idea of command is to instruct. All right. This one is to instruct. I guess you can say that these would be his last words. These would be a dying man's last wishes, a dying man's instructions. Now, in any culture, a dying man's last words are perhaps some of the most important and the most revealing because there would not be much to say thereafter. And he would have to choose his words properly, carefully, so that at the end of this, he would have felt that he has done whatever he needs to say and to instruct Solomon so that life continues without him. Verse 2 speaks, I am going the way of all the earth. Now, this idea, I'm going the way of all the earth, uh, literally, I am walking the way of all the land. Everyone in the land is going to come to an end. And there will be an afterlife, right? The afterlife. And so the Hebrew culture doesn't talk much of the afterlife. They talk about something which is more concrete, that there is coming to an end for everyone in the earth. So be strong and prove yourself a man. Now, this is important for us to understand. To be strong means to be, well, I guess you could say that this would be courageous, be resolute. You need to be quite determined to make decisions. So this is a word strong. It's not about power. And then it says here, uh, prove yourself a man. Now this phrase here literally means show yourself. Show yourself a man, that you are an adult, that you can choose between good and evil. This is a very important Hebrew concept that a child does not know how to choose. And so in Deuteronomy chapter 1, they're called innocents. They are not able to choose between good and evil. And until a person is able to choose between good and evil, then the person is a child. And now, as an adult, he is king. And so he has to show. Now, these are words that seems to imply, right? Seems to imply that Solomon is still a young man. And we will talk about it in our next chapter. How old was Solomon when he became king? We will have to deal with that, and we will look at the alternatives or interpretation of how old Solomon was. And there are varying views that Solomon was actually a very young man at this point in time. That is why David told him, prove yourself a man, show yourself that you are a man. You're not a child anymore. Verse 3, it says here, and do your duty to the Lord your God. The idea here means to keep, right? Keep the charge. Keep the charge of God. Now, the idea of a charge means these are the obligations. Obligations as a king, obligations as a child of God, part of the Israelite contingent, part of the sons of Israel, but more importantly, as king, because God has left strict orders as to what happens that the king must obey. And so it says, keep the charge, do your duty. That's how the translator would translate that. But basically, to make sure that the charge of God is observed. What is the charge of God? And so we have here the last words of David to walk in God's ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses. Now, the idea of the law of Moses is the word Torah. In the Torah of Moses, so that you may succeed in all that you do and wherever you turn. So these are conditions to success. Now, the idea of this word succeed is to prosper. The How should we say, the Hebrew concept doesn't have this idea of success in the modern term, but prosper is one way of looking at things. Prosper literally means that in this word, the ability to discern, that you may succeed, prosper, so that you can discern how to be successful, how to be prosperous in that sense, how to progress. I think that would be another word to use. How to progress. Success is seen as the ability to continue, right? One after another. And that would be success in the Hebrew context. When you're having the ability to size up situations, you are able to move forward. And that is what this word actually means. So that you may prosper, you may progress in all that you do. And wherever you turn, meaning whichever decision you make, turning left, turning right, that you can continue to proceed on and to press on. That is the idea of prosperous. That's the idea of success in the Hebrew context. And we shouldn't actually have a more Asian idea that success means that somebody has a lot of money, has a lot of wealth. That's not the idea of Hebraic success. And so let us be mindful that David wants Solomon to be able to proceed and continue to be able to be successful as a king. And that would be the concept here in verse 3, and leaving with him the last words that he has to do his duty. The charge is this: to walk in his ways is also to keep all these. These are the things that is written, right? It's written in the law of Moses, in the Torah, according to Moshe. As God has given to Moses, this has been left to them as, in the English, the law, but it's more proper as instructions. And so when you walk in God's ways, you're walking in the instructions of God, and thereby to keep. This word to keep is to guard, right? To guard his statutes, commandments, ordinances, testimonies. These are all similar words that describes the Torah. And as this is called the Torah of Moses, it is not Moses' instruction. It is Moses written down God's instructions. And that is the duty of Solomon the king. And so these are important lessons that we can actually glean on, so that we understand what is our duty as man, what is Solomon's duty as king. And so without saying a whole lot, it's contained in the words of God called the law of Moses. Verse 4, it says, so that. Now, this word, so that, or that, it's an interesting word, for the purpose, right? For the purpose. This is what it means. The purpose of doing this, and when Solomon does that, then God may fulfill his promise which he spoke regarding me. This is the purpose for Solomon to do his part. And by doing that, God would fulfill his promise. And the word fulfill his promise is to cause his words to stand. You see, this word fulfill is not the common English word. Unfortunately, it is written here this way. This is to validate the words of God spoken to David. When Solomon keeps the law, the Torah, this would show that God's word will stand, because God will do his part concerning the davar, which God spoke regarding me. And this would be things which are not exactly written in 2 Samuel chapter 7, what we call the Davidic covenant. These are extra words which we don't read, and it is now revealed to us. Now understand that not everything God said to David is written down. And so now we are recounting back what God had said to David at this point in time in 2 Samuel chapter 7. He says, if your sons are careful about their way. The word careful about their way means to keep. That's exactly what verse 3 says, that Solomon must keep the way of God, to walk before me in truth. Now, this word truth is being trustworthy. Walk in truth means walk in trustworthiness. And it says, with all their heart and their soul. What does that mean? Remember what heart means? With their mind and their being. This whole idea is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. This is a recount of Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. This is part of the Shema, and that you will not be deprived of a man to occupy the throne of Israel. Deprived means it will not fail. So that the throne of David will always be occupied by a son of David. And so the idea here is to perpetuate the throne, one must keep the instructions of God, particularly as a king. And these are the last words that David is making to Solomon. Up to verse 4, these are the keys to success, keys to becoming a rightful king, keys to become a king that God will bless, keys to perpetuate the throne of David. The secret is to walk before God in a trustworthy manner, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Now we come to verse 5, and verse 5 speaks about some, well, I would say, last words of David, that this is a business that David could not settle in his lifetime, and he wants Solomon to settle some scores in our colloquial terminology. These are the last words charged to be given to Solomon, that since David could not resolve this, it is up to Solomon to resolve this. And so let's observe verse 5. Now you also know yourself what Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did to me. Now, this is commonly understood, right? Commonly understood. This is what Joab did to David. This should be read in 2 Samuel chapter 11. This is the letter sent to Joab via Uriah. And that was something which Joab has been threatening David. That is the tradition that's been passed down. Now, exactly what we don't know in the text, because we were not exactly told what it was. But this is particularly telling because it is something that Joab did to David, which we haven't been told, and it likely could be this, right? Next, the second thing is that what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel. The two commanders is Avner, the son of Ner, and Amasa, the son of Yether, whom he killed. So he killed two persons, and look at what David said. The killing was done in the time of peace. And the judgment was he put blood of war on his belt that was on his waist and on his sandals that were on his feet. Now, this seems to be a very strange way of saying I think this one could be gleaned in 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 8. How he killed Amasa by putting his sword into his sheath and thereby somehow killing Amasa, and the blood dripped on his sandals and in his belt. So the accusation or the judgment on Joab was that he did one here, he killed Avner, he killed Amasa. And this is tantamount to death because he did kill during the time of peace. Now, what happened was during the time of David, he never did anything to Joab. And as you can see, Joab was trying to sort of clean up the house. But based on this statement, David is charging Joab for killing Avner and Amasa. And this in itself is very serious. And David needs Solomon to deal with Joab, And in so doing, verse 6, it says, and you need to act or do or execute according to your wisdom. Remember, Solomon is not an old person. And many people would say that, when you grow older, you get wiser, and that wisdom comes with age. But at this point in time, Solomon was not old. He was very young. And yet, David calls to Solomon his wisdom. And he needs this wisdom so that when he walks in the word of God, when he follows the Torah of Moses that was written down as the words of God, that he will gain even more wisdom. And so David's declaration is, do not let his gray hair go down to Sheol in peace, meaning he cannot die naturally. That's basically what it means. Do not let him grow old and die naturally. He has to be summarily executed. How? Don't know. So use your wisdom. These are serious words that are left for Solomon to undertake. Verse 7. Then there is the sons of Barzillai. Now, you know Barzillai the Gileadite from Gilead. When he ran over to the eastern shore of the Jordan, when Absalom was there to usurp his throne, he had this person, Barzillai, take care of him, feed him, and Barzillai showed kindness to David. And so now David in verse 7 says, show kindness to his sons, because Barzillai was already very old. We read that he was already 80. And so let them be among those who eat at your table. Offer them the right hand of fellowship. Now, obviously, it is literally who eat at your table, like Mishbosheth. David allowed him, the son of Jonathan, to eat at his table. But it also means that this is the right hand of fellowship. And so it is important then to show respect and kindness to Barzillai's descendants. And the reason is they assisted me when I fled from Absalom, your brother. Verse 8. Now, verse 8 is a reminder of Shimei. Now, Shimei, the son of Gera of Benjamin from Bahurim. Remember when David was bowing, crying as he plodded towards leaving the city of David, leaving Jerusalem, up the Mount of Olives, and going away to the eastern shore of the Jordan. Shimei came and said a lot of hurtful things. Say, it was he who cursed me with a painful curse the day when I went to Mahanaim. And all these curses, remember, curses means pronouncements of bad things. Not that it will happen, but these are hurtful things. These are curses. Even in today's community, in our own day today, when you say something bad about another person, it is seen as a curse. It's pronouncing bad things to another person. And David remembers this. But when he came down to meet me at Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. At this point in time, Shimei came to receive David as he came back to the western side of the Jordan River, and there was a promise made by David. Now, notice David did not deal with Joab, did not deal with Shimei, because he was not in a position to execute. He wasn't in a position to deal with such things. He was already in a position being compromised. He was not in his full stature of a king. He had to be returned to his throne because of Absalom. Now, one of the things that you find is that David was not particularly strong in dealing with some of these matters because he was dependent on Joab. And he had a heart that was compromised, perhaps, by the things that he had done. And these things are happening to him because of what he did to Uriah. And so David was seen as one who cannot complete the judgment. And he passes this on to Solomon. Verse 9. And he says, now do not leave him unpunished. It says the word unpunished means do not leave him innocent. He is not innocent, right? He is, in fact, guilty. But he is not punished. So do not remove him from obligation. Now, this is actually passed on to Solomon to decide what to do. And so look at what David says. For you are a wise man. See, there are a number of hints by David that the character of Solomon has always shown to be wise. Has always shown to be wise. He may be young, but he is wise, nevertheless. And so how is this going to happen? David is merely telling Solomon, you should know what to do. And so in verse 9, he says, you will know what to do to him. I don't know what to do with him, but you will. You are now king. And you will bring his gray hair down to Sheol with blood. Means what? He will also be executed. How, in what manner, when? Don't know. And this is all left to Solomon. Now, we have seen in 9 verses the last words of David, reminding him of his obligations to God as a king, the law of Moses as God is given, and they have it now, and they are obliged to keep and walk right before God. But the second thing would be all the things that David couldn't do. David expects Solomon to finish the task. How? Don't know. That Solomon will figure it out. Now, remembering Solomon is a young man, I would say. How young, we will deal with it next week when we come to chapter 3. But more importantly is we are here and we see the hints of David suggesting, even at this young age, that Solomon appears to be wise and he should know what to do. Otherwise, David wouldn't even say that. Verse 10, after saying all these things, and then we don't know how long thereafter, but we know he had said all these first. And then David laid down with his fathers, and he was buried in the city of David. Now, this is a very, I would say, a Hebrew way of expressing. You find this in the book of Genesis. You find that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob will be saying they were gathered to his fathers. And so he laid down with his fathers, where his fathers were. And so these would be the tomb. So lay down with his father means to be buried in the same place. And this would be very visual, as you can see, describing that David had died and then he was buried in the city of David. And so the idea of lay down with his fathers is about burial, which means that we can see this is an A, this is a B. And we are told that it was in the city of David. And so David has died. A piece of information that's left with us in verse 11 is this. We have read this before. In verse 11, this was told to us in 2 Samuel chapter 5. Right? This was in 2 Samuel chapter 5. And it's somewhat of a repeat. And now the days that David reigned over Israel, 40 years. Understand, over Israel would be all Israel. This would be the 12 tribes, both north and south. So look at the description here. It says that in Hebron, he reigned for 7 years. In Jerusalem, he reigned for 33 years. This would be 2 Samuel chapter 5 when he took over the stronghold of the Jebusites called Jerusalem, or renamed, and moved the Ark of the Covenant in chapter 6 back to Jerusalem. And so all in all, there is a total of 7 and 33, a total of 40 years. And that is a long time, much longer than Saul. We begin a new segment. It says, and Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his kingdom was firmly established. Now, the idea firmly established means it was firm. And being firm means it is secure. Being firm means it would be stable. There would not be any trouble to rock his boat. It is settled. And so there would be no expectations of anyone challenging him to the throne. That was what it means. He sat on the throne of David. It is established. Firmly established means it was very established or exceedingly established. It was established to a high degree. That would be a way of looking at it. And so the sitting on the throne is literal, right? Is literally to sit. And this means that he reigned and he is firm. And so in many ways, you can see that this narrative is telling us that there should not be anyone challenging Solomon to the throne. Verse 13 talks about Adoniah, who was challenging. And so, and now, Adoniah, the son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon. Now, there is an interest of Adoniah to hatch another plan. And I would say that this is the beginning of another plot. Another plot. And then Bathsheba says, do you come in peace? And he said, peace. Now, what does that mean? Do you come in shalom? And he says, shalom. That's basically what is said. It is peace. Verse 14. And then Adoniah has something to say. After saying shalom, he says, I have something to say to you. And she said, speak. Verse 15. He says, and then he said, this is what he was going to say after Bathsheba says, speak. So, and then he said, you yourself know that the kingdom was mine. And this is a declaration that he is the older brother and that all Israel had intended for me to be king. The word intended literally means set their faces. Literally looked upon him. So he said, the kingdom was mine, the throne was mine. And however, the kingdom has turned about, turned away. And then, this word is, and then, it has become my brothers. And so this is the complaint. It was supposed to be Adoniah, the throne, and then it swung to Solomon. This is how he is expressing. Now, all of this is Adoniah's words. And then he admitted that it was his from the Lord. Now, this is a very crucial statement that he acknowledged that the throne was his because of God. So it is a divine appointment. And so he had nothing to say about that. If he had his way, it would be him as king. But as it went, David managed to pronounce Solomon as king. And it is acknowledged as a divine appointment. Verse 16. And so I am making one request of you. And as request, it is a petition. Something to ask, right? A petition. If you like, a favor to ask. And says, please do not say no. Like, do not refuse me. What do you mean refuse? Do not return to my face, right? Do not return to my face. This is literally what it means, refuse. Don't turn it back at me. And so Bathsheba says, tell me what it is. verse 17. And then he said this. He said, please speak to Solomon the king, Shlomo Hamelech, and said he would not refuse you. Now, the word refuse again is the same, that he will not return to your face. And then he will give me Avishag, the Shunammite, as wife. And then you know the word wife, it's English, this would be woman. Basically, to be married to Adoniah. Now, this in itself is a very tricky plot. Now, most of us may not be aware that after the attempt to have Aviatar and Joab, and they were celebrating, and then David in chapter 1 had sent Zadok and Nathan to anoint Solomon as king and let him sit on the throne and write his official will. There was no more ability to then turn the event around because it was locked in that Solomon will be king. But what is Adoniah trying to do? By marrying Avishag, there will be another chance. There will be another chance because this would be near Solomon. Otherwise, he has no reason to be there because Avishag was serving David. And so by asking for Avishag, Adoniah was plotting another coup. And that would be the thinking of the Jewish commentators. And Bathsheba said, very well, I will speak to the king for you. And verse 19, so Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adoniah. And then the king stood to meet her, bowed to her. Now, this is important that we understand this. The king stood to meet her, bowed to her. The word bow, the word bow here in verse 19 is to bow down, how should we say, to cause himself to bow down, an acknowledgement of his mother. Now, what does that mean? Whenever you bow down, you are bowing down always to someone greater than you. And so the king himself is young. So you have the mother, and then you have Solomon. And when Solomon bows down to the mother, Solomon is indicating that the mother is important. Remember what the Torah says, honor your father and mother. And as Solomon goes, he is young. Although he is king, he is young. And he bows down to the mother and then sits down again on his throne, and thereby taking on his role as king. This is to show the acknowledgement of his mother, kavod, that his mother is important, to honor the mother. And that means that Solomon is really keeping the law of Moses. And in that day and age, especially in a Eastern culture, Solomon is showing us that the culture itself that's built into the law of God to make sure that Solomon does not forget his father and mother. Now, the father has died, the mother is still alive, and with this, the mother is being shown the honor. Now we read on the final parts of this verse. And then he had a throne set up for the king's mother, and she sat on his right hand. And thereby you can see that the throne, we have Solomon, and then we have a seat for his mother on the right hand of Solomon. That's Bathsheba. With this, we can see that there is a sense of honor that is given to the mother. Throne means a seat. Do not always think of a throne as a king's throne. This word here is a seat, a chair, if you like. To be set up on his right hand means that is the right hand in Hebrew terms is of authority, of power, of recognition, and thereby giving honor to Bathsheba. And verse 19 is so important to show of reverence to the mother. With this, we come to the end of our session today. We will carry on next week from verse 20, because that conversation is to show us how Solomon would think. Because I had suggested that there is a common tradition that Adoniah wanted Abishag as a wife so that he could draw near to Solomon, and thereby giving him a chance or another chance to take the throne. And we will study this next week when we continue verse 20. With this, we come to the end of our session today.